Hi, Professor Katchanovski. Welcome to the Nexus. Thanks for joining us. This
Hello,
is
thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. Is this a small channel? I'm here in Switzerland. My name is Mark. I'm a physicist and an entrepreneur, and I just have an interest in geopolitics. But enough about me. Let's go. Let's go on. So, as you are a professor of political science, comparative politics, and geopolitics at the University of Ottawa. Ottawa? Do you say Ottawa or Ottawa?
Ottawa.
Ottawa, Canada.
Yes, thank you.
You're also a political commentator and a key scientific voice in matters Ukraine. And I personally have been following your work for several years now, and I reached out to you about a year ago. But back then you were swamped, and I saw your book. I believe you said you were writing on that book. Have not yet had the chance to read that. Anyways, I'm very thrilled to have you here on the Nexus. So
Yes, thank you for the invitation. I'm also, even so, this is also a very busy time because my another book, which I have to finish in just a few weeks, to submit to the publisher about the Russia-Ukraine war and its origins. So again, this is also busy, but now I think it's less busy on Ukraine of politics and conflict matters. So there's opportunity to talk about this issue, and I am glad to join your podcast on this important topic.
of course, yeah, I'm very glad to have you. So let us start with yourself, since this is your first time on the Nexus. I wanted to give you an open-ended question. Can you tell us something about yourself which you think is necessary here, which I haven't yet delved into?
Yes, I think I'm a Ukrainian, Canadian political scientist, and I'm originally from Ukraine, from western part of Ukraine. I was born in western Ukraine. I'm Ukrainian. I speak Ukrainian as my native language, and I studied in Kiev, Kiev University, in which I graduated, and then I got my PhD and PhD in the United States at George Mason University, and I specialize in Ukrainian politics and conflicts since I wrote my PhD dissertation on regional divisions and conflicts in Ukraine and Moldova. Um, and this dissertation was published later as a book. And actually, when I tried to publish this book, I submitted this book to Cambridge University Press, which is major academic press. And they told me that they cannot even send my book manuscript for review because at that time they said only few people would be interested in the topic of Ukraine and conflicts in Ukraine. In entire North America. And now you have basically millions of people. Just this has become top issue, and even now this is a top issue because of conflict in Ukraine. So at the time when I started researching this was regarded as a not important issue at all. And so for this reason, again, there are very few people actually who studied such conflicts and politics and understand this from a very long time, and especially kind of scholars who are political scientists who are able to do research in Ukrainian language, which is again not a major kind of language which was learned by many political scientists before. So this is now, I think, just illustration of importance of this research. And I published already 5 books. I have another book about Russia-Ukraine war and its origins, which will be published later this year, which is important book as well. And in addition to this, I have another book about independent Ukraine or Ukraine since independence, which will be also published by another major Western academic press. So, and I published like 21 peer-reviewed journal articles and 13 book chapters. So I'm very active, not only in social media, but also kind of in researching this. So basically, this is my background and I think my introduction.
Thank you very much. This was there was a lot of detail. I actually had a few questions prepared towards your origins in Western Ukraine and all that. Let me ask the one that I have right here about what got you interested into politics, studying politics and geopolitics in the first place. Was it like a catalyzing event, or did you always know that you wanted to go into there?
Well, I think there were 2 reasons. One, as I mentioned, I was born in Western Ukraine, in the city of Lutsk, in close to Poland. And I grew up basically with my family, my mother, grandmother, telling me about their own experience. So my grandmother, when she was a child, then it was part of Poland and Russian Empire. So she grew up at the time when there was World War One. So she told me about being refugees during World War One as a child, and having lost their house. And so, and this is a terrible time again to experience. And so she was not able even to go to school to study because this was World War One. They were refugees, so this was a very terrible experience. And she would tell me, not just there would be like she was afraid that there would be a new war. So war was the most kind of uh, worst thing, worst experience which can happen. And this is what I learned from the start. And my mother, she also grew up during World War II as a child. So she also told me about all this experience being, again, surviving World War II and execution of people, again. And so my grandfather was put for execution for just as a random by the Nazis and also my grandfather had to dig his own grave because he gave a loaf of bread to a soldier who was POW in a camp near Helm region, which is now part of Poland. So they were also, and my mother and grandmother, they never move on their own, but they live in 5 different countries. So this is just also experience because they were Ukrainians living in what is now Poland. So they also kind of experience this. So this was very tragic situation, and this is how I became interested in politics. Growing up at the time when there was Soviet system, you do not have any of this information. This was basically all information about POWs, about this kind of forced resettlement of Ukrainians from Poland was not public, and so this is why I became kind of interested in conflicts and politics. And in addition to this, I also grew up at the time of the Cold War, when there was confrontation between Soviet Union and the United States. So this is also became a very important issue. So I also wanted to study this issue. But it was not actually possible to do this because when I wanted to apply for my university, like to study international relations and politics,
let me just ask for our viewers here. When was that?
This was this was in during Soviet Union, so I like in the 1970s, 1980s.
1970s. Okay.
Yes, and so when again I was a child in 1970s, and so when I wanted to study for university, applied to university in 1984. Again, still during Soviet Union in Soviet Ukraine, I wanted to apply for international relations, like department and or study international relations, or economic relations, or international relations and politics. But you cannot just apply there. I saw that the requirement to apply for such university in in Moscow, which had like entire university about international relations. You had to give a recommendation from Communist Party regional office, and you need also to give a kind of clearance from KGB. So I was not, even so I was interested in politics from very young age. I was not a member of, I never joined and had no intention to join Soviet Communist Party, which was kind of, again, only way to get basically such accommodation and to have advancement in the Soviet Union. And so, and the same for the same reason, I could not even apply to a small faculty of international relations in Kyiv University, and so this is, and at the time you have students at this faculty included Petro Poroshenko, who became president of Ukraine, and Mikhail Saakashvili, who became president of Georgia. So you have, and they became again. So this means that they got a recommendation from regional committee of Soviet Communist Party, which means they were very active ideologically, and also from families of Soviet elite. And in addition to this, they also had like clearance from Soviet KGB. And now basically they kind of say that they were always like for Soviet for independence and so on. But actually, this is quite opposite. And in addition to this, when I became a student at Kyiv University of National Economy, which did not require such recommendation. And when I was a student in 1988, I attended first demonstration, which was opposition demonstration or independent demonstration against Soviet government, which was held in Kyiv since 1920, around 1920 or even 1980. So basically for 70 years, there was no such public demonstration. I attended this demonstration because I was interested in politics. And this demonstration was attended only by a few dozen people. So this is like, and they had a Ukrainian flag. One woman I still remember would just try to unveil Ukrainian flag, and she was arrested immediately by undercover, like I think again, very likely
Excuse,
KGB
excuse
agents.
me for the excuse me for the interruption. I just misheard. Is it a few dozen or a few thousand people?
No, a few dozen.
A few dozen. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Later, which I attended. So I attended when I was student in 1988 to 1990. I attended all major demonstrations in Kiev, which were then just attending like a few thousand basically people. So I attended because again I attended all of them. All as at the time when this was regarded basically as a way kind of this was very dangerous because I mentioned you can be arrested, you can be even expelled. And when I wanted to write my undergraduate thesis in 1990, I submitted my proposal to university and my advisor. And my advisor said that he could not be my advisor after he read my proposal. He said, and he said
you're using Western theories, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes, because he said that, like he said, he invited me to talk with head of my department, who told me that if I would write my proposal based on Western economic theories and on theories of Max Weber, who was leading classical sociologist, German sociologist, political sociologist, would be expelled from university if I would do this. So, and I wrote my dissertation. I said I'm going to write in Ukrainian language. They said this is not a problem. So I wrote in my native Ukrainian language, and I wrote based on Western economic theories and on a theory of Max Weber, and said that in my undergraduate thesis that Soviet system is ineffective, and bound to collapse. And this is and they gave me C mark. So they would not expel me because there was politics was changed. There was kind of perestroika and glasnost under Gorbachev, and there were elections. So there was relatively more freedom, but there was a real possibility I would be expelled. Even so, I had all excellent marks before this. So this is just a situation. The same people later they would change overnight their views, and but this is kind of just illustration that I always regarded academic research as very important, and not just to follow any kind of politics and political events, even at the time when this was very dangerous to do.
Is that the reason why you went to the U.S. to study at George Mason University? Because of the dangers of being expelled?
I think this is a little bit more kind of complex because I could not go to graduate school. So I wanted to study to become professor from age of 10 years old. So, but after so I was able to get diploma even in 1990 from my university. Even so, I was told again that I would be expelled before, but I could not get any recommendation from university to apply to graduate school. So you needed to have recommendation from university to apply to graduate school. So I could not do this. So basically, for this reason, I had to go and work in the financial department in my native city of Lutsk, in which I basically was involved in political rehabilitation of people who were sent under Joseph Stalin, to Siberia. And I was working for 2 years, and then Soviet Union collapsed. And only after the collapse of Soviet Union in 1992, I was able to apply to, not to to go to graduate school. And I applied to Central European University, which was a university founded and financed by George Soros in Prague, in Czech Republic. Then it was Czechoslovakia, but when I studied, it became Czech Republic after a split between Czech Republic and Slovakia. So this is, and afterwards, in 1994, I was accepted to George Mason University, but I could not have any funding because at the time, so I looked for 1 year for funding, and I was able to get some money teaching, not research assistantship from my university. So I was able then from George Mason University. So I was able then to go and study in George Mason University, and finally got my PhD there. And afterwards, I had various research and teaching positions at the Library of Congress, at the Killlist Center at the Library of Congress, at the University of Toronto, and also at the State University of New York at Potsdam, and Harvard University, before I moved to Ottawa University, to University of Ottawa, where I'm now teaching and doing research.
That is one amazing story. Thank you for that one. I assume your CV, you can open it up like a roll, and it scrolls forever and ever, doesn't it?
I think now it's quite long because of publications on all this experience, but actually because I was a student, my advisor was Simon Martin Lipset, who actually I wanted to study with him, and so he was one of the most cited scholars in sociology, political sociology, and political science in history. So he's and he published just enormous amount of books and articles. So for so I had this like as a guide for. So for me, obviously, I cannot compare to him, but for me, this is I learn a lot because because I do not want just to study Ukrainian politics, which was area of specialty. I also wanted to study U.S. politics. And that's why I studied with Lipset, who was made classical sociologist and political scientist researching U.S. politics and also Canadian politics. And this is why I also became interested in Canada as well. And I still research U.S. and Canadian politics, and I published a book together with Lipset based on my research comparing U.S. and Canada.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I can somewhat empathize with you because I myself was born in Bulgaria after the Soviet Union in '92. Although my parents did witness the Soviet Union, and my mom told me stories, and my dad told me stories. My dad is viciously opposed and calls them the communists, whereas my mom has a more nuanced view. She said that education was good, it was free. There were some slots obviously reserved for the Communist Party members and so on. But it's a very mixed story. The one thing I did want to get into about the Soviet Union, which you mentioned, is the level of censorship. As you said before, you were told that you would not be able to publish your dissertation in based on Western theories unless you wrote it in the Ukrainian language, if I understood you right.
No,
Now,
unless basically I was told I need to write in like Marxist Leninist, all of this kind of Soviet state planning and basically everything which was taught in university, like all of the official ideology based.
yeah. Now, from what I heard, well, from what I read by following your work, because I also wrote a lengthy article on how and why we came to be in Ukraine, and I obviously stumbled upon your work, which was this amazing, very scholarly article where you evaluated all of these thousands of video sources and documentations and the angle from which the snipers shot on the Maidan, which we're going to get into later. But what I wanted to ask you, as far as I understood, you also became the target of heavy censorship here in the West. Can you elaborate on what exactly happened, how your paper, as far as I know, was removed from several journals? Can you tell us what happened there?
Yes, so this is why that's why I always I regard as a duty of a scholar, basically to tell what is actually happens based on evidence and not based on some kind of ideology or political preferences. So that's why I published my research about Maidan massacre, and I did this before. Since the start of massacre, I was researching this live when it was happening, and presented my first paper in 2014, and published later now a book and peer-reviewed journal articles. But when I wanted to publish article, submitted this to a peer-reviewed journal, it was accepted. About this article was about Maidan massacre, so this was accepted after peer review with minor revisions by editor of this journal. But
which journal, if you want to say that?
This was a journal, I think, called Social Sciences, basically Social Sciences journal. So actually, this is a journal which is published in Switzerland.
Ah,
This is Switzerland.
I'm going to walk over to their
based in
bureau and talk
Switzerland.
with them.
Yeah. Okay, that's why. So that's why so they accepted my for publication, like after peer review, everything. So by editor, and then they changed their decision. Another editor basically changed this decision, and and they rejected my publication of my article. And this is like just quite unprecedented because there was I do not know any such situations in the West that you have such open censorship. Obviously, for political reasons, because acceptance was based on very positive kind of letter, which was which was posted by this editor of this journal, who was in charge of my article on the website of this journal, and there was also support from Jeffrey Sachs, economist, who actually, when I asked to review this case, but again, so they refused to publish my article, kind of, and without giving any reason. Basically, this was just a clear case of censorship. So I published then this article. Basically, I split it into articles and published them into two separate articles in two major peer-reviewed journals. In again, one published in Netherlands and another published in I think United Kingdom. Yes, so this is like journals, which are major journals cited in major academic databases, and so I published them, which is again clear indications that this rejection was quite unprecedented, was based on kind of censorship and not on any kind of other reasons. And then afterwards, I published last year. I published a book, an entire book about the Maidan massacre, and this book was published as open access book here, which is freely available, electronic edition. And this was published by Palgrave Macmillan, which is major Western academic press, and now also part of Springer Nature, which is I think a German publisher, but also I think they have headquarters in Switzerland, because when I signed book contract, it was saying this is like Switzerland based publisher. So this is like also a connection in this regard. And so I have now, but there was another case of censorship. Basically, when I had my book, I signed book contract with Routledge, which is a British publisher, academic publisher, press, to publish my book about the Russia-Ukraine war and its origins. And so this book was supposed to be published last year. This is after very positive peer reviews, and so everything was fine. I submitted my manuscript, but then editor from Routledge told me that they could not publish this. They demanded that I revise my manuscript, incorporating all other revisions, all other alternative views, basically, which means that they specifically said that I have to include information or views that Russia blew up Nord Stream, that Zelensky, that Ukraine under Zelensky is democracy, that there was no Western blocking of peace deal, there is no proxy war, and so this is just basically all the contrary to all evidence which I have. So I could not do this falsification. I wrote and I describe all these views on all these narratives which are promoted by the media, by politicians, and so on. And I also describe evidence which I saw and researched about all these issues. So I did these revisions and submitted my revised manuscript to the publisher two times. But again, this editor refused to publish this. They said I still have to include all these alternative views. Basically, this meant if I would not do this, they could not publish my manuscript. Even so, this was under contact with Routledge. So I had to cancel my contact. And so now, just yesterday, I kind of received a contact and sign, which is now signed by publisher, by another major Western university press, and by me, to publish this book by different Western academic press, which is also, I think, which is even more kind of reputable than Routledge, and this was done after positive peer reviews of my manuscript. So this is again another illustration that this is a rejection by Routledge, which was also unprecedented. I don't know any such cases of rejecting book under contact. So this is just shows that it's now very difficult, even for me, like a Ukrainian scholar who has no links to Russia or kind of and was actually very kind of supporting all this democracy and human rights and studied conflicts in Ukraine since for a very long time, and was actually one of the few people, just a few dozen people, who attended first opposition demonstration in Ukraine at the time when this was very dangerous. So this is, and I wrote my thesis again in Ukrainian language and was certain risk expulsion. So they basically kind of, this is now regarded as basically they just ignore all of this and they just demand that I have to follow the narrative. For me, this is like a lot of similarity to the Soviet Union experience, and that's why I'm not afraid, because I was not afraid during Soviet Union. When you have even much worse possibility, you can get arrested. As I mentioned, you can get expelled from your university just for doing all this basic stuff. And so for me, that's why kind of I regard this as a duty of a scholar, and I always say no matter what somebody wants to hear, but I say what I see based on my research and based on evidence.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I was just about to jump in on that. I come, as I said, from physics, and I have developed this worldview that there is a truth out there which is objective and independent of consensus and independent of what people think. But I heard, are you familiar with Professor Finkelstein, a scholar who speaks a lot about the Israel-Palestine conflict? Maybe you have heard of him.
Yeah, I heard of him. Yes.
Yeah, I recently heard him on a podcast say that for some people, and he referenced specifically the people, or those that adhere to the Zionist ideology, for some people, the truth is that which serves the cause. But as a scholar, that obviously is in contradiction with the facts. And the truth lives out there, and some people really have a hard time understanding that the truth, it does not conform to consensus. Like back in the day, we learned that we're not in the center of the universe, that the sun is in the center of our solar system. Then we learned that we're not that dissimilar from animals, right? And so it goes on. And so we still see this politicized, the truth is that which serves the narrative, being very widespread and affecting you. But you also touched upon something very, which was also perfectly flows into my next question, which is I was going to ask you, how does your experience of censorship in the USSR, in the Soviet Union, back in Ukraine, compare with today's Western censorship overall? Because to me personally, it seems like, I mean, I didn't grow up in the USSR, but from what you say and from what I heard from my parents as well, the censorship there was quite open. You will not publish that or else, right? And you also had the Politburo, and it just censored stuff away. Whereas today, we pretend like we're free. We pretend like we have free media. But the bottom line is in Switzerland, we've had, what, 3 years of war now? Probably some 10,000 articles have accumulated across the various media space. And I would bet you, I have research actually, there isn't one single pro-Russian article. There isn't one article that interviews, say, a Russian general. They all interview ex-NATO or NATO generals. They all go to the ISW, the Institute for the Study of War. But yeah, so how does your experience compare in Western modern day censorship and old school Soviet censorship?
I think this is also a very important issue, and I can say that I gave interview to a Swiss magazine. I think it was this.
Weltwoche?
Yeah, yes, exactly. And so they published my interview, kind of not interview. They published my article about Zelensky at the time when Zelensky was kind of regarded as kind of Chechen and so on, and all this image. And so they published my kind of article based on my research, kind of about Zelensky, that he's not kind of any Chechen, and basically all this, and that he was basically abandoned this peace deal, which was negotiated in spring of 2022 because of kind of Western pressure and so on. So they published all of this kind of article, which I think was important. They also published my previously published article about Maidan massacre. So this is, I think, was exception to this. But I think kind of my experience also based not only on my own personal experience in the Soviet Union, but also I did research about politics of the Great Terror in the Soviet Union. And so I look into intellectuals who were kind of arrested and executed on political charges, on all these charges kind of during the Soviet Great Terror under Joseph Stalin. So then I look into specific physicists and other fields, and there were a lot of people, kind of scholars, very famous scholars, who were in touch with Western kind of counterparts, and they were accused of being spies because they corresponded with them or visited and or just had letters or just attended academic conferences. So this is then it was regarded as a crime, basically. If you have any contact with foreign countries, and I also did a study about mathematician, Ukrainian mathematician, who was arrested and sent to Gulag, to Siberia, and perished there. And I found documents in the American archives, National Museum of American History, and other archives, documents which show that his mathematical publications, which he published in Ukrainian language, were used by the American inventor of the electronic digital computer, John Vincent Atanasov, in the United States, who was professor of mathematics and physics, and he was of Bulgarian origin. So I found kind of his family was from Bulgaria, so he don't speak any Ukrainian, or I don't know even if he spoke Bulgarian, but he also did a translation of this book, of this Ukrainian mathematician. I found this translation, 2 volumes of this translation from Ukrainian language into English language, and he was helped. I found also letters which show this Atanasov was helped by Liberian who was immigrant from the Russian Empire to do this translation. So this is, I think, also very important because at the time, and he sent letters to this Ukrainian mathematician at the time when this mathematician was accused and as a basically kind of a foreign agent because he had contacts with other mathematicians, and he was also from Western Ukraine. So this is like also experience kind of the Soviet Great Terror when even anything you say, kind of even just routine behavior was regarded as a kind of crime. So this is why, for me, I also have this kind of view that compared to the Soviet Union, Western kind of censorship or kind of this is nothing basically. This is not the same. And still, there is a democracy. Still, there is freedom of the kind of freedom to say, especially not always in the media, but kind of on social media, especially now like Twitter. I think a very important kind of tool to kind of to basically say what I see, and that's why I publish a lot on Twitter. Based on my research, academic research, which is, and I also give a lot of media interviews, but again, this is media is not very good in this regard, kind of because they would report only like limited kind of amount of information, and in this is I think and often just use bits and pieces which fit narrative and would not report anything which would go against this narrative. So I think this is just a personal experience. I can say this is kind of Western again, especially I think Canada is I think might be better in this regard than Germany, because I had Germany is very kind of strict, and also United Kingdom also very tough and so on. But in Canada it's more kind of there's relatively more freedom I think in this regard.
Yeah, no, Germany and UK. I read somewhere that in the UK last year alone, no, in 2022 alone, about 3,500 people were arrested only for social media posts, and that was before they made this new law, this counterterrorism law, with which they will censor even more. And I don't know if you heard, but even here in Switzerland, we pretend to be so free, and yet you were censored by this publishing house, by this journal. And I don't know if you heard, but about 1 or 2 weeks ago, the journalist Ali Aboumina, he was arrested in Zurich, and quite brutally arrested, and he was withheld the right to call his lawyer, among many other things. And that was allegedly on the order of Mario, I don't know his last name, I think he's the mayor of Zurich or something like that, an ultra-Zionist character. But yeah, in any case, I do feel like it is different. And as someone who is starting out, I guess, in alternative media and whatnot, I do feel it's very repressive, because I have had the experience of multiple shadow bans and bans across various social media platforms. I agree it feels like it has changed under Elon Musk's X, well, better than Twitter, let's put it this way. But it is quite oppressive. Even like I teach physics in school, even there I got censored. I had placed a document where I had put a link with a QR code to my article, just for people in the teacher's room who are interested so they can read it up. And I got called to the rector's office, and I got told to put it away. It's, yeah.
Yeah, but I can also say, I think there's also experience comparison with Ukraine now. So in Ukraine, what I think I would not have been able to do in Ukraine. If I were in Ukraine now, I would not have been able to do this research. I would not be able to say anything, even in like what I'm saying right now, because this would be regarded as kind of criminal, and so I would be immediately expelled from university. Even this would be worse than the Soviet Union, I think, because then it was kind of only threat and it was more liberal. That's why I regard now Ukrainian situation in Ukraine as comparable to the Soviet Union at the end of 1980s, before this perestroika. So based on my personal experience and comparison, and so I know like many cases of scholars and researchers who had to flee Ukraine because they were kind of investigated and persecuted by secret police for writing or doing their research, which is, for instance, UNUPA and other kind of areas. Or some of them got arrested and this false charges again. So this is like in UK now, this total repression, which is comparable to the Soviet Union, kind of even going back to the Stalin times. So since the Stalin times, there was no such kind of extent of political repression and persecution, politically motivated persecution in Ukraine, including amongst against scholars as kind of. So for this reason, perspective from Ukraine is much worse compared to Canada and other Western countries, including like kind of Western European countries. So in this regard, I also for my own personal experience in Ukraine, when I first did my research about Maidan massacre and also Odessa massacre and far right. So in 2014, they took away my house and all my property, like which like all my land and all other property in Western Ukraine, kind of as retaliation for this. based on false, based on fabricated court decision. Basically, judge was made a phone call. Somebody, I don't know, this was from the top, from higher ups. They called the judge, and judge may issue such decision to basically, against all the evidence, to take away my house and my land, which I inherited from my mother, and in which I live myself and stayed during the summers each year when I studied and work in the U.S. and Canada since 1994. And this is again was unprecedented, but and you can not do anything because this was done for political clear political decision with, from the top. And recently, after I also there was scandal in Canadian Parliament about this SS Galicia division veteran, who was given state innovation by Canadian Parliament, by Prime Minister of Canada, by Zelensky, who was visiting in the Parliament. So this SS Galicia division, Nazi SS Galicia division veteran, kind of became to kind of prominence. I identified him in my tweet again on social media because I did research about this unit, about SS Galicia division during World War II. So I immediately knew that there was a reference on social media and some tweets referring to him as veteran of 1st Ukrainian National Division fighting with Russia during World War II. And I immediately knew that this was actually, he referred to SS Galicia Division. And so I posted about this. I found his photos in this division, his memoirs, that he joined voluntarily this division and so on. And this became a viral story, which was reported by Canadian media. All major Canadian media interview me and report this. This was CTV News, Globe and Mail, and also like even French media, Le Figaro, and many other media outlets reported about this. So this was a big story in Canada. And this led to apology from Prime Minister of Canada, and also this led to resignation of the Speaker of the Parliament, because this was regarded as unacceptable for Canada. But in Ukraine, Zelensky stayed silent, and they put me kind of in retaliation for what I did. They put me on this peacemaker or Myrotvorets hit list, kind of for my crime, for committing crime of this, basically of exposing this SS Galicia division veteran, because this is they call this anti-Ukrainian kind of and was this Russian propaganda or something, which is quite unbelievable. And they also said that another my crime was Maidan massacre studies of far-right movement.
Excuse me, Professor. Let me just interject here because maybe some of our viewers will not know this. You you spoke out of my heart. That was going to be my next question. Anyway, what I wanted to say is the Ukrainian government under Zelensky is leading this website called Myrotvorets. Mir means peace, Tvorets means the maker, the creator. So Myrotvorets is the peace creator. However, this is a very gruesome site, hosted apparently, according to the website itself, near Langley, near the CIA headquarters in the US. And what it does, primarily its first function is to expose people whom they deem to be enemies of the state of Ukraine, such as yourself, which is researchers and journalists, also Jeffrey Sachs, even the guitarist from Pink Floyd, Rogers, is on there. And so it is a very gruesome site which publishes and doxes people and shares their information and incites people to kill them. And there have been countless people who have been killed, including, for example, the daughter of the Russian philosopher Daria Dugina, and many others on this hit list. Just I wanted to interject that.
Yeah, I can add. There is also they put on this list Tulsi Gabbard, who is now head of director of U.S. intelligence. So she's in charge of all U.S. intelligence, and she's still on this.
She's still on there.
Yeah, wow. She basically accused of being like Russian agent and so on. This is just unbelievable. And
it's Orwellian. It's quite Orwellian.
Yeah, this is like Orwellian.
Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, you landed on Myrotvorets. By the way, I'm very sorry to hear about your house, but I also want to congratulate you because those people that land on Myrotvorets, usually this is like a badge of honor, which means you're actually having an effect on the world. So yeah, thank you for your contribution.
Thank you.
So let us move on to then Ukraine, because we're already touching on to Ukraine. Just as a broad question before delving into Ukraine, I have had countless conversations also with colleagues and friends, and there is this very widespread view that it's all narratives. It's just one side saying something, the other side saying something, and it's normal because we're at war, right? It's normal to have propaganda everywhere. And there's such a thick fog of war that you just cannot know what's true. And so just I wanted to ask you, how would you respond to someone saying, how do you know what's true? What is your yeah, your epistemology, your methodology of working out what is true and what is just hearsay and daresay.
Well, this is like I think important issue because I wrote this in my Maidan massacre book in my book about Russia-Ukraine war, and also a paper which I presented about Russia-Ukraine war and its origins at the International Studies Association annual conference in Chicago this month, just 1 week ago. So this is basically I start saying the truth is the first casualty of the war, but the task of the scholars is not just to kind of is to actually show what actually happening, what is going on based on evidence, not based on any kind of political motivations or like ideology, any propaganda, which is often disseminated by governments, by politicians, and often repeated by the media at face value. So this is like a very common issue. This is not the first war in which, first conflict in which you have all this propaganda-driven narrative, disinformation, which I think this is just feature of conflicts. So because I study conflicts for a long time, with violent conflicts. And so for me, this is nothing unusual, and so that's why I just use my methodology, which I use to study all the conflicts. I do not accept any statement at face value, which is given by any politician, by any government, unless there is confirmation of this, like from independent sources, or kind of things like videos which confirm this, or some other documents which like independently would confirm this, or testimonies and so on, or if such a statement made by government officials or like other people involved in conflicts which would be against their own vested interest. So if this statement in just conforms to their interest, like vested interest, political interest, self-interest, so this is like can be regarded as not reliable unless it will be supported by other evidence. So I apply this to all like statements, all claims made by like Ukrainian officials, Western officials, Russian officials. It does not matter. The same methodology is used to evaluate all the statements. And again, I look into again, and I do my research also very important. I do my research based primarily on primary sources,
Yeah.
which means like videos, or like I look like more than 100 videos each day on different Telegram channels about war in Ukraine. I examine witness testimonies and so on, and statements by actually original in Ukrainian language, in Russian language, and also in English language and Polish language. So for me, this is like important not to just repeat what would be repeated by the media, because if you would, it's often you just watch what the media would report, for instance, about some attack in Ukraine. So they would often do this, or some strike, or some events in Ukraine. They would often just repeat what Zelensky or other government official would say, or Western government official would say, without any challenge. Basically, this is like becomes a fact because they said this, so this means this is what happened. But if you look into videos, and if you examine actually what was going on, if you look into casualties which are reported, then after this strike and so on, often you have very different results, and which is not basically, which is just shows this is statement is not kind of credible, and you cannot just rely on this. You need to rely on videos. You need to rely on evidence, which is like objective and so on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So it's basically the way I would put it, if I were to summarize it in one sentence, scholarly or scientific work is not allowing yourself to jump to any conclusions.
Yes,
you gotta go to the bottom. But yeah, I know exactly where you're coming from. I mean, no, to a certain degree, I know where you're coming from. I have not done the depth of studies which you have done for very many years. But when I was writing my article in Ukraine, I went very deep. I have 240 original sources, and I dug all the way to the very original for each and every claim. That takes a long time.
yes.
But yeah, so let us rewind to what happened in Ukraine. Could you, in your own language, give us a 2-minute bird's eye view of the situation, of the war, of the conflict as you see it? Like just a very broad statement, and then we can go more into the details.
We have now very hot weather in Ottawa, so this is very sunny now. So this is like it's still snow outside, but so and this is I think very important. So about war in Ukraine, 2 minutes. Okay,
Yeah.
this again, I have a book about this.
Yeah, of course.
It's like almost 400 pages, but so I can say based on my just summary briefly that invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022 was illegal under international law, but this war could have been prevented by Zelensky and by the West because and it could have been stopped at any time, and specifically during spring 2022, when there was very close Ukraine been to agreement to resolve this peacefully. And I also said this from the start, that Ukraine would not be able to win this war and defeat Russia, and the longer war would continue, the worse the situation would be for Ukraine, and any peace deal which can be signed by Ukraine would be on much worse conditions. There is now a real possibility that this war could end this year because of election of Donald Trump as a president of U.S. And since Ukrainian government is Ukraine is client state of the U.S. and Ukraine is proxy in this proxy war between West or NATO and Russia in Ukraine. So U.S. has a very real power to end this war and stop this war and force Zelensky to sign a peace agreement, or any other government official in Ukraine to sign a peace deal.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. So, the way I see it, and I think that's the way many scholars will agree, is it started, well, the main part of the conflict started around 2014. Of course, there was a color revolution in 2004, I believe, the Rose Revolution, but let's skip over that, or the orange. I don't remember. Let's skip over that detail. So, in 2014, there was a series of events which culminated in the Maidan Events, which culminated itself in the ouster of then President Yanukovych and the new government. And I stumbled upon your work as you came to speak about the snipers. And if I resume your work correctly, you came to the conclusion that the Maidan snipers, which were the catalyzing event in the 2014 Maidan events, that was a false flag staged by the opposition in the Hotel Ukraina. So, yeah, can you walk us through the events? Like, it started, I believe, with the EU Association Agreement. And in particular, before you go into that, I have a question about the EU Association Agreement, which is, as far as I know, the EU Association Agreement with Ukraine was problematic on many levels. First of all, it would have cost Ukraine over 200 billion a year for various reasons. There was the one-sided economic reach of the EU, which would have gotten the EU the rights to Russian markets, but not the other way around. But if I'm not mistaken, it also contained military cooperation and interoperability clauses. Am I right in these details, or how did it go down?
You mean this agreement which by Russia to provide money for Ukraine, or European Union Association Agreement? Yes, there was. This is like the conflict between Russia and Ukraine goes back to 2014, specifically to Maidan massacre and violent overthrow of the Ukrainian government during the Maidan. And I researched this issue very extensively. And this was Euromaidan was called Euromaidan because there was a mass protest in Ukraine after decision by Yanukovych to abandon or suspend, not abandon entirely, but to suspend signing of association agreement and free trade treaty with European Union, in which Ukraine would basically agree to to some conditions, economic conditions, close economic integration with the European Union without any possibility of joining the European Union. And so this agreement was which Yanukovych initially promoted. Later, even so, he was pro-Russian in terms of his party and his own position during election campaign. So he actually abandoned this treaty and suspended this treaty after he learned about negative consequences to Ukrainian economy from just signing this treaty, which would basically mean that Ukraine would have to abandon like trade with Russia and would have to try to export to European Union, and there would be a lot of quotas by EU imposed on Ukrainian imports from Ukraine, so Ukraine would not be able to replace Russia as the main trading partner with the European Union. So for this reason, Yanukovych tried to get a credit from Russia, and so he was able to obtain money from Russia, I think a large amount of money from Putin in 2013. And this was, and his abandonment of this European Union Association Agreement was used by Maidan opposition to start mass protests in Ukraine, in Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine against Yanukovych, and this led finally to to Maidan massacre, because mass protests did not achieve their goal to remove Yanukovych from power, so they were not able to achieve this goal, and for this reason, Maidan opposition, including elements of oligarchic and far-right elements of Maidan opposition resorted to this false flag Maidan massacre, specifically to blame government forces and to blame falsely Yanukovych for this massacre, which was committed by snipers who were located in Hotel Ukraina and other buildings which were controlled by the Maidan opposition.
Now, on a scale, I want to evaluate the claim whether it is fair to say, like scholarly, fairly objectively fair to say that it was a coup d'etat or not. So if we take a scale and we put on one hand side the arguments that it was not a coup d'etat, it was an organic protest, and on the other side we put the weight of the arguments that it was in fact a coup d'etat, how would you weigh it? Would you say it was a coup d'etat, or would you say it was a popular democratic uprising?
This is the issue which I examine in my book, in my Massacre book, in my Russia-Ukraine and Russia-Ukraine War and Origins book. Yeah. Then also in an article which will be published later this month by EconWatch, which is a major peer-reviewed journal in economics.
I will link that up. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, this is actually looking into the detail of this issue, and so that's why, based on my research, I can say that there are narratives basically which Western and Ukrainian government narrative and media, they say that there was a revolution of dignity, and this was a revolution, and Maidan was peaceful. Maidan protesters were peaceful, but they were massacred by Yanukovych and his government forces for no reason, basically, and that he fled afterwards because he was responsible for this mass murder of Maidan activists. And this also narrative promoted by the Russian government, which says this was fascist coup by Nazis or neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and there is a Nazi regime in Ukraine after Maidan, and this was done with the U.S. involvement, also kind of using as provocation, using like Georgian snipers and far-right and so on. So I look into, again, political science theories and evidence, and according to my research, kind of this Maidan was represented kind of a combination of elements of mass protest. There was a real mass protest in Ukraine, but it did not achieve removal of Yanukovych. So this was not main issue. There was also kind of elements of color revolution, political revolution in Ukraine. And in addition to this, there were other two elements which were critical and most important for removal of Yanukovych and overthrow of Yanukovych. And this overthrow was done violently by means of forced flag massacre and also by his illegal impeachment, because he was also blamed falsely for this Maidan massacre. So this means that there was elements of a coup which were crucial for removal of Yanukovych. So this clear evidence of a coup, because he was overthrown by a small number, not by all this mass protests, he was overthrown by a small number of oligarchic and far-right elements who basically committed Maidan massacre and falsely blamed Yanukovych, and also he fled Ukraine because of assassination attempts, not because he was responsible for this massacre. And his removal in the parliament was also done illegally in violation of Ukrainian constitution, and people, and even many deputies voted for his removal under duress. They basically were, parliament was encircled by Maidan opposition activists, and they used violence against deputies, basically threatening them if they would not vote for removal of Yanukovych, so they would be beaten and their houses were burned and so on. So this is not a democracy. This was undemocratic removal and so on. But in addition to the elements of coup in the removal of Yanukovych, there is also evidence of U.S.-led regime change, which is also very important, because this was not just Ukrainian kind of opposition doing this. There was also evidence of U.S.-led regime change in Ukraine as a policy specifically to remove Yanukovych, which I also examined in all the studies, which is, I think, kind of, I think this was also very important because basically United States and other Western governments supported this violent overthrow of Yanukovych government, and by means of mass murder, which is, I think, an illegal removal of Yanukovych from his position. So this was done specifically to kind of weaken Russia, to contain Russia, because they supported this for such geopolitical reasons, not because they were supporting democracy, supporting like human rights. Even so, this is like main narrative. They actually did what they did was opposite, and this Maidan massacre and removal of Yanukovych was very crucial for subsequent conflicts in Ukraine, because this led to Russian annexation of Crimea, in the retaliation of this, which was pro-Russian and pro-separatist region, and also led to civil war and Russian military interventions in Donbass. And finally, this conflict culminated in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So the claim that this war was just unprovoked, this is just Russian invasion for just take control of Ukraine without any kind of reason. This is not. This is false narrative again.
Yeah, it doesn't hold. So
Yeah.
before we delve more into the detail of the standard narrative, the common wisdom, I wanted to add that about the elements you mentioned of U.S. U.S. support. It is the standard scheme of color revolutions, right? You you fuel an organic protest, you amplify it, and then you structure and organize it, and you sow radical elements into it. This is the standard procedure, as far as I know, in which U.S. proceeds, and also Victoria Nuland, the then State Secretary of the United States, she also bragged of having spent over $15 billion in Ukraine for this political change since 1991, which, by the way, also breaks the Budapest Memorandum, which is the standard narrative used by the Ukrainians. Because in the Budapest Memorandum, in which Kazakhstan, by the way, and Belarus are also members, well, signatories, it also contained clauses of no economic coercion. So just wanted to mention that. And in my article, I compared that with Switzerland with, well, this very basic comparison, but I port Ukraine's GDP to the Swiss GDP and calculate the amount, these 15 billion, and it amounts to, I think, something like $42 billion in Switzerland. And I can guarantee I could buy political movements and democratic voices with 42 millions over 10 years in Switzerland. That is guaranteed. But so I wanted also to add on to the elements which you said, onto the scale in your arguments, that there was also the Nuland phone call, where aforementioned State Secretary Victoria Nuland was caught on a phone call with the then Ambassador Jeffrey Piot of Ukraine, where they decided that Yatsenyuk were to become the new prime minister after the ouster of Yanukovych. That was, I believe, 2 weeks before it happened, even though Klitschko was the figurehead of the Maidan protests. And so now to my question to you, I have seen pictures of Yatsenyuk doing the Hitler salute. So he is part of that very far right, let's call it Banderite movement, if that is a fair way to call this whole very far right ultranationalist wing of Ukrainian society and politics. And so my question to you is this: since, as far as I know, the opposition was Svoboda, Udar, and Batkivchina, those were the signatories of in the Maidan agreement, I think on February 2018 to February 2014. And my question to you is, I have heard you say, and I've also read in other places, that the actual Nazi elements in Ukraine are below 2 or 3% in the overall population. However, they also hold great political sway. They hold paramilitaries such as Aidar, Azov, and others, which have now been incorporated into the Ukrainian military. And my question is to you is, how strongly is this Nazi element represented in the government, especially in the Rada? For example, we know from Zaluzhin that he has 2 busts of Stepan Bandera in his office. But how representative is the Nazi, the far-right element in the Ukrainian government currently? Or since
yes, this is also, I researched this issue and very closely, and I have also published about this in peer-reviewed journal articles, and also would have a part of chapters. I have chapters on this issue, far-right and neo-Nazi specifically in Ukraine during Maidan and during war in Donbass, and also during the Russia-Ukraine war. And I can say that Zelensky, that actually Yatsenyuk, he was not a kind of far-right or neo-Nazi. He was actually a kind of a member of oligarchic fatherland party, which is led by Tymoshenko. So he was part of oligarchic politician, kind of, and his so Nazi salute, I think this was just a photograph of him raising hand. So I don't see this, I don't regard this as that he gave Nazi salute. I think this is, kind of, it was used, but I think he also kind of, he was from Western Ukraine, and so in this regard, he is kind of also kind of very emblematic of this Ukrainian politics, because he represented oligarchic elements and parties which led by Tymoshenko, who went into politics basically to become wealthy and to be kept from any kind of just to stay in power, to get power, and to enrich themselves and to keep themselves from any persecution for what they did illegally, like illegal privatization, illegal kind of enrichment, and so on. So Yatsenyuk was in this regard very common, typical politician, and he represents this kind of also kind of situation when far right and neo-Nazis became mainstream. So they became mainstream in Ukraine when during Maidan they joined Maidan opposition. Like so, they joined with oligarchic parties which are led by Yatsenyuk, by Klitschko, and also far right Svoboda party, and they also joined with Poroshenko and form a kind of de facto alliance, Maidan opposition alliance, and which says power in Ukraine. So this was kind of far right was marginal in Ukraine before Maidan, but during Maidan they joined with oligarchic elements, and they were able to overthrow Yanukovych. Even so, they still remain relatively small in terms of their membership and representation in the parliament. So in the parliament, again, in Ukrainian parliament, there was like Svoboda deputies during Maidan, but after the Maidan, the number declined significantly, and they are not very important power in Ukrainian parliament.
Okay.
They also not represented in the Ukrainian government. Now there were 4 ministers from Svoboda, Svoboda party, which was originally a neo-Nazi party in Western Ukraine called Social National Party, but now they basically Svoboda also declined in significance, and you have now neo-Nazi-led Azov, much more important as a kind of far right and neo-Nazi organization in Ukraine. So they still are relatively small, even so their numbers increased significantly since Maidan. But I think the much power or most power of far right and neo-Nazis in Ukraine came not from their kind of numbers or from their kind of representation in the parliament. They are much more powerful, I think, than any other far right in the entire world right now, because they rely on violence and they rely on threat of violence. So they basically have, as I mentioned, they overthrew Yanukovych by means of this forced flag Maidan massacre. So they became very powerful as a result of this. And but they did this in alliance with oligarchic elements of opposition. So this means Maidan opposition. So this means they are protected. So they have a de facto immunity from any persecution. So and they rely on violence, and they can threaten anybody who would go against them and would or just to adopt, for instance, policy which would go against their interests. And this happened with Zelensky, because Zelensky was elected in 2019 on a platform in which he promised to end the war in Ukraine, in Donbass, and to make a peace deal with Russia to end this war, kind of civil war in which Russia supported separatists in Donbass. And so he basically tried to do this immediately after elections, but he was not able to do this for 2 reasons. I think one was Western pressure. Biden, when he was elected, so basically he said they tried to use Ukraine as a proxy and a client state against Russia. But another reason was that far right, so specifically neo-Nazis Azov. So Zelensky went to frontline to try to kind of to meet with Azov members who were on the front line and were blocking basically withdrawal of Ukrainian forces, separation of Ukrainian forces as a part of this Minsk agreement between Russia and Ukraine to separate forces for ceasefire on this line. And he was met with Azov veterans, and they told him there are videos of him, basically they kind of told him that he is like a loser, basically use all these kind of terms, and he would argue with them basically. So you have basically, this is quite amazing. You have president of country elected on this popular mandate to implement his peace policies, and he would go to frontline to beg like neo-Nazis, relatively small unit of neo-Nazis to just not to block kind of decision which he signed with Russia to make separation of frontline. So basically this shows that he basically, president of Ukraine Zelensky had to kind of beg neo-Nazi elements, neo-Nazi-led Azov, to kind of not to oppose him, and afterwards they even went to assaulted presidential office building with police standing by. So basically this meant that Azov and other neo-Nazi formations in Ukraine became so powerful that they're able to basically veto any decision by Zelensky or any Ukrainian government to make any peace deal or to do anything which would be against their own interests. So in this case, I think this is just illustration of kind of outside power of far-right and in particular neo-Nazi Azov movement and other far-right and neo-Nazi formations in Ukraine, which is nothing comparable in the world. And just today I saw a news that neo-Nazi-led Azov brigade, one of two Azov brigades, now became a army corps. So this is like they even became much more powerful and expanded their kind of formal structure. Even so, this is called now kind of Ukrainian armed formations, but they're still led by neo-Nazis from Azov.
Yeah. Well, I will link to that video which you mentioned. I remember the one where the officer was treating Zelensky with great disrespect. And I just wanted to say that this makes it rather difficult for public perception and also in debates to talk about this Nazi element, because first of all the articles, for example, Guardian and mainly the UK media had a lot of articles regarding this, which have now been censored. Now you can only find them on the archive, right? And also, if you talk to people and they just say, well, this is Russian propaganda, even after the aforementioned SS Galicia, what was it, the Humke, was celebrated in the Canadian Parliament, right? But this makes it rather complicated since the government itself is not made up of these far-right parties to still hold the claim that the politics are still dominated by their will, right? But yeah, it's fascinating. I have now a rather more pointy question for you, which is that there are some, including the Jeffrey Sachs, which you referenced before, but there were actually many people, including John Mearsheimer, who, and maybe Brian Barletic, if you know him, he's also on the Myrotvorets hit list, who claim, and I must say I'm part of this this belief. I also share that belief that the whole crisis in Ukraine was not just amplified, but also planned for a very long time. You can go back to Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard of '94, where he says that the ultimate showdown of US hegemony will play out in Ukraine. There is this letter from George Soros in 1997 where he claims that ideally, well, first of all, he claims that NATO will have to have a new enemy image for it to perpetuate after the collapse of the Warsaw Pact. And he states that ideally you would have Slav-on-Slav fighting with NATO equipment, so very ghoulish premonition. Then you also have the whole history of the West, in particular the US, taking the most extreme elements in various countries. It used to be the Mujahideen, but you also had Operation Red Sox in Ukraine in 1949. The whole Gladio stay-behind armies, which were also former Nazis, which were guerrilla armies trained and equipped and commanded by SACEUR, by NATO. And it goes on and on and on. There's a lot of evidence basically to say that the conflict was not just provoked, but also is the result of at least 2 decades of US foreign policy. What do you think of those ideas?
Well, yes, this clear evidence that there was US policy was to contain Russia and and after the Cold War, there was belief in the US. I was studying in Washington, D.C. and doing research in Washington, D.C. area in the 1990s, mid-1990s and end of 1990s. And so there was kind of a view basically that Russia was defeated, Soviet Union was defeated by the US. And this was, I think, kind of, and then basically US can do anything. And the task of US foreign policy is to contain any kind of reemergence of any similar country or any challenge to the United States, either Russia or China. So this was kind of basically a goal of US foreign policy was to kind of make US the sole superpower and to prevent any competitor arising even at the regional level. So you have for this reason you have removal of this Gaddafi and like Libya and Iraq and Saddam Hussein basically on the false claims and so on and attempts to remove Venezuela, Chavez and so on. But so this is kind of a policy which motivated basically by geopolitical interests. So this is very clear. But there was no kind of evidence that they at the time they wanted to have violent conflict, because there is an important distinction between conflict which is not violent and conflict which is violent. Because if you start a war or violent conflict, it's much more difficult. This is like a new step. This is like new kind of type of conflict which will become very difficult to stop and then resolve. It's much easier to prevent such violent conflict, and this is why this policy of basically containing Russia was done kind of done by political means, by or expansion of NATO, which was motivated by this policy, without any kind of evidence that they wanted to use military arms. And even Ukraine at the time was not easy kind of choice to contain Russia, because at the time Ukraine was kind of a split country between pro-Russian east and south of Ukraine, which was also very anti-NATO. So a variety of opinion polls show that only small number of people in eastern and southern Ukraine supported joining NATO, and
About
there was
20%,
majority
right?
in western Ukraine. Sorry?
About 20%, if I remember correctly.
Yes, even smaller. Yes, this is, and the same applies to other issues. So there was a very big regional divide. So eastern and southern Ukraine were pro-Russian regions. They wanted to have close relations with Russia, to join some kind of union, economic union with Russia, or customs union with Russia. While western Ukraine and to less extent central Ukraine wanted to have more pro-Western orientation, joining NATO and European Union. And so in this case, I think this was also reflected in the results of presidential and parliamentary elections. So Ukrainian politics was switched between pro-Russian and kind of pro-Western candidates and politicians, and this was done peacefully. Even so, there was some Orange Revolution, which also kind of resulted in change of government as a result of kind of mass protests, which led to a new round of elections. So in this case, I think, but still was peaceful, and this all changed with Maidan, because Maidan made a change from non-violent conflict to violent conflict, and this was, I think, very important step, crucial step, because if you have violence, then it's much more difficult to kind of to stop this violence. And I think this also, I quote in my book, interviews with two leaders of Svoboda Party, which is far-right party, which was originally neo-Nazi party, and this and the leader of Svoboda Party, Ternibok, and his deputy, Kosholinsky, who also was deputy head of Ukrainian parliament from Svoboda Party, they said in these separate interviews to Ukrainian journalists, which was published in Ukrainian language, in Ukrainian book about Maidan, they said that they met with some representative of West, from the West. They do not name who this was, but they said that they met with this representative few weeks before the Maidan massacre. And they say that they discussed basically what it would take for Western governments to stop supporting Yanukovych and recognizing Yanukovych during this Maidan protest. And so they had discussion. They said this was already after a few protesters were killed. So this happened at the end of January, when a few protesters were killed. And evidence also shows that they were killed not by police, but killed also by Maidan snipers, basically. Specifically to blame falsely government of Yanukovych. So they said they had discussion with this Western representative, they and other members of Maidan leadership, they had discussion with Western representative what it would take for West to stop recognizing Yanukovych. And so they said how many people need to be killed to kind of for the West to stop basically recognizing Yanukovych. And they say they asked them like 3 people or 5 people. They said no. Western representative told 5 people not enough, 3 people not enough. They say like 10, no 10 is not enough, 20 not enough. So they said they agree 100. They said if 100 people would be killed, then West would kind of stop recognizing Yanukovych and would turn on Yanukovych. And this is, they said this was like a kind of basically some kind of market talk about just bargaining, basically how many people need to be killed, kind of, and they said Yanukovych will be blamed anyway for this. So this is like basically a key kind of evidence that there was some Western representative. I think this means that somebody who can speak on behalf of the West. It's not some kind of some just minor official. So you have, because you have to meet with leaders of Maidan opposition. So this might have been a representative who had power, and I think very likely from the US. So I do not know who this was, but I think this was a person who could talk on behalf of Biden, of Obama and administration at the time when Biden was vice president and responsible for Ukraine. So, and they said this basically that this is what agreement, that if there will be 100 people killed, Maidan activists killed, then Western governments would turn on Yanukovych. And this is exactly happened. After Maidan massacre, immediately Maidan opposition announced on the stage that there was heavenly hundreds. The people who were killed as a result of Maidan massacre were called heavenly hundred. Even so, their number was less than 100. They included people who were kind of killed for just in like in some kind of kind of just outside of Kiev in some just like criminal, just for criminal reasons. They were killed. Also, people who committed suicide were included in this 100.
Yeah.
People who died from medical conditions like heart attack or and so on, who were on Maidan but died from medical conditions. They were included in this having 100. So this was clear case that they wanted to have 100. And they did this immediately, announced 100, having 100, and immediately after Maidan massacre, Biden wrote in his memoirs that he called Yanukovych immediately after Maidan massacre and said that Yanukovych was basically responsible for this matter without any investigation. Biden said Yanukovych was responsible and that he had to flee Ukraine, not only leave his presidency, but he need to leave Ukraine. And this is, I think, also very clear evidence. This is like that this what happened exactly was as was agreed with before 2 weeks before Maidan massacre, which is I think clear evidence that there was also Western kind of how to say Western role in this massacre. Even so, it's not kind of direct order basically to massacre this, but I think kind of this is just a clear incentive. At least it will be a very clear incentive for Maidan opposition to massacre their own and claim that this was done by Yanukovych forces. Specifically to blame him because this was for their own benefit, because they knew that 100 people killed, and this is what just happened during Maidan massacre, and they blame Yanukovych, and immediately Biden just turned against Yanukovych, and without any investigation. This is, I think, clear evidence that there was kind of in this conflict was started not only just by Maidan opposition, kind of oligarchic elements and far right, but this was done with involvement of Western governments, and specifically very likely U.S. government, and I think there was also some kind of covert activity, but I don't have any such evidence because there is no such evidence in public domain, with the exception of this like telephone calls which kind of you mentioned.
Yeah, very dark, these people. We have been at it for about 1 hour and 20. I just wanted to ask you, do you have a few more minutes? And I have some, well, I have plenty of questions, but I have some questions on Moldova, geopolitics, the EU, and so on. Or should we do this for another time?
I think if you want, I have like a few more minutes, but if you want to do this another time, I also will be able to answer. I just have a kind of about Moldova. So I have just kind of I specialize in Ukrainian politics, so I know about Moldova. I follow Moldovan politics, but not to the same extent as Ukrainian politics.
Of course, I also see Ukraine as a very actually it feels quite amazing to live in this. Actually, it feels like you're living through history for me. I don't know if you know what I mean. And Ukraine is the center point. It's the pivot where we have this transition in global powers and so on. But in that case, I think it makes more sense to close this one up, and then I will prepare another one, another episode for more for other issues, including broader geopolitics and perhaps the transition into multipolarity. Do you have anything else? Yeah, I have one question which I feel like I still want to ask you if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Which is, you mentioned that the war was illegal, which from my research, I'm not so sure, because Russia did, as far as I know, try all the diplomatic channels. It tried in the Security Council, it tried in the EU. It wrote a letter in December 2021, I believe, directly to NATO and to the US, which even Stoltenberg referenced. And Russia cited Articles 51 through 53 in the UN Charter, the rights for defense and self-defense, to justify legally their invasion. Why do you think this argument does not hold up? Because after all, we did have heavy attacks by the Ukrainian forces, including using Geneva forbidden weapons, such as the little petal mines, the little butterfly mines, which they dropped on Lugansk and Donetsk city to just injure and maim civilians. So taking all that into consideration, why do you think that argument does not hold up?
Yes, this is like argument by Russia, and Putin made this argument as well, justifying Russian invasion of Ukraine. So he said basically that Russia invaded Ukraine because of in defense of separatist republics of Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk republics, which Russia recognized few days before as independent countries, which were he did and signed a treaty, basically mutual defense treaty with them. So he said that Russia intervened to kind of defend their allies in Donbass, like Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk republics, people's republics, specifically to protect them against imminent or kind of or threat of Ukrainian invasion or Ukrainian military attack, which was imminent or not imminent, but was a real threat. And I examined this argument as well. I follow all these developments again, looking into primary sources since the conflict in Ukraine, including war in Donbass. So I can say that there was clear evidence that Zelensky changed his policy, and instead of a peace deal, his promise of peace deal, he issued kind of new policy guidelines that he wanted to take back control of Crimea, which was annexed by Russia, and also take back Donbass. And he said he would not exclude military force in this case. So so basically his policy was official policy that Ukraine would take back Donbass by force, or kind of very likely, but there was no evidence that this was imminent. So this is to have a kind of legal, kind of under international law, you need to have imminent threat of invasion to kind of to prevent this attack, but there was no evidence that this was imminent invasion. Even so, there is clear evidence that there was deployment of Ukrainian forces to this area before this, but not to kind of the extent that would suggest that they, or in numbers that suggest that they wanted to kind of launch attack on entire front line, or to attack like Donbass, kind of and kind of and Luhansk region controlled by separatists, but also there is also evidence of shelling, increased shelling in Donbass right before the Russian invasion, in a few days before Russian invasion. But again, this was much bigger compared to previous months and previous years, but it was much smaller compared to height of war in Donbass in 2014 and 2015. So this is again, there is no kind of that's why I regard this war as illegal, because there is no such evidence that kind of should justify this invasion on as preventative kind of war, which Russia claimed to be legal because of imminent threat of attacks by Ukraine, which was not, which I don't see any evidence supporting evidence of this.
I see.
But even so, this was obviously, as I mentioned, real issue, and that Zelensky made this his policy, and there was such some signs, but there was no evidence that this would be like actual attack.
I see. Well, thank you very much, Professor Katchanovski. Where can people best find you?
Thank you. And so I can be reached on X, on Twitter, or Twitter. I'm not sure how it's called now, X or Twitter, and also I'm also on Facebook, and also if people are interested, you can also include links to my books, which are academic websites, and also my GoFundMe campaign for kind of crowdfund publication of my books as open access, which means anybody can read and download them and translate in other languages. So my Maidan massacre book was already translated into, I mentioned, German and language and Czech language, and the other translations, Japanese and in Greek language. And so I want to make my research freely accessible to people and publish my research as open access. And so this is just would be helpful as well.
I will link to all of these sites. Do you have any final thoughts?
I think no. This was a very good conversation. You know a lot about this conflict, which is I think also kind of very open-minded. This is I think very kind of a nice conversation and talk about this. So I would be happy to again to have a new discussion on the issues that you mentioned.
I will be as well. I will hit you up for that. Thank you very much. I was also very thrilled. Amazing conversation. Thank you very much, Professor Ivan Katchanovski, and have a great rest of your day. See you soon.
Yes, thank you. You too. Thank you.